Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the third album from Rumpistol, Dynamo. Alright, I won't beat around the bush for this one, as should be obvious from the fact that I sprung for this CD. This third album was the big keeper for me in Rumpistol's discography. Last time I covered what had to be his least interesting and probably overall weakest project in Mere Rum, but he followed it up with what stood out to me as my personal favorite of his projects. Well, this project isn't that fundamentally different from Mere Rum. The attention to detail and sound design's on roughly the same level, a lot of the same mixes of sounds, combining his laid-back IDM textures with plenty of acoustic instrumentation, and lots of bells and kalimbas and guitars and that kind of thing. It's roughly as cohesive, too. A lot of these tracks go for very similar blends. But still, the actual execution is miles better this time around. These tracks have more movement and tension and groove, they feel like they're really going somewhere exciting and have a lot more emotional depth to them. They're a little more easily distinct from each other too, and despite mostly just feeling like parts of the same whole, it was even pretty difficult for me to even pick a least favorite at all on this one. Each track felt like they added something to the experience and had the potential to be a favorite track. And it's really tight, only 8 tracks and not much room for error. And I really think Rumpistol was able to make the most out of it. There's no real weak points to speak of. I mean, it's not like a mind-blowing classic that's completely unlike anything I'd ever heard before, but it was the one album of his I could definitively label as great. So, may as well go down individual tracks. We start with Transit, which despite having a similar mix to the stuff on his previous album, the contrast between the two albums' approaches is made fairly immediately. The low-key drum machine grooves are a lot more thumping and driving at a steady 4/4 pace. They have more weight to them, there's a lot more feeling of build-up and tension as it goes on, with various reverse textures coming and going, and really good use of bass, both with the stronger bass lines in the middle and the more rumbling textures near the end. Even the lead melodies are more memorable. That main hook played on the kalimba is probably the easiest textural element to recall on the album. Do 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 do. Gets you hooked pretty immediately, doesn't waste any time getting to the good stuff, and does a good job of setting the tone for the rest of the album. Most of the other tracks here go for similar mixes, but go about it in slightly different ways. Like Mobile, for instance, it moves in exactly half time of Transit's tempo, and blends into it really well, but combines a lot of glitched and chopped up and stuttered acoustic guitar sounds with some piano licks that create a sunnier and more pleasant vibe, I guess. So not without a marginally darker bridge section or two. And then Reflexion, it felt like it almost had some influence from like old school dubstep and drum and bass with its percussion patterns and occasional bass wubbing, but going up against warmer, clean electric guitar plucking in a cool way. One of the more simplistic tracks here, but one that would keep sticking out to me. I would look down on my iPod and be like, oh, this one's cool. And it's not even one of my big favorites. That might even be my least favorite here if I had to pick. And the next handful of tracks is just a bunch of big gems in a row. Beito at first would kind of blend in with the previous track, but later would bring in this violin on top and really give the tracks some more emotional weight and kind of remind me of the opener to Orbital's Blue album. And there's these awesome bursts of distorted bass that really kick everything into high gear, and other side tracks into more old school dubstep influence sections, combining with other parts of the track. It's absolutely stunning, and by this point in the album I was already like, yeah, this project is officially in 8 out of 10 territory now. And somehow it gets even better in the second half of the project. You got Rehux, which is basically a better version of GT from his last album. Got a similar time signature, though I think this one is more like 9/8 or something. And similar lead kalimba melodies, but with a much deeper and more intense mix with all these forward reverse guitars and pianos. It just chugs along and keeps me on the edge of my seat the whole time. There's some pluck textures that come in later that are somewhere between guitars and harpsichords, and have a strangely, like, 60s-ish texture to them. And the way they go up against those little squirty little synth stabs around the edges maybe gives me like some mild Stereolab vibes, I don't know. But anyway, after these two of the most intense tracks in the bunch, we move on to Analog, which is most characterized by all these chopped up vocal snippets not saying any words in particular. Yeah. but are definitely among the most easily recognizable textures on the album again, and the mix as a whole is generally lighter and more laid back than it was before. You got some guitars ringing out in the style of Boards of Canada's Dave Van Cowboy, going up against the usual tapping and detailed IDM percussion. Very nice stuff, and some real soaring atmosphere developed here. And then Kocmoc, that was one that looked cool just from the title, which looked like some weird, not really portmanteau of Cosmos and Cogs or something. And it turned out to live up to what that title brought to mind quite well. Among the most heavily detailed tracks in the bunch, rumbling bass going up against a sea of light, clinking, pitched mechanical sounds and glockenspiels in a really cool and evocative way. You also hear some whispering wordless vocals and even some saxophones and other woodwinds in the mix. There's seemingly so much going on every single second of the track, but at no point does it feel overwhelming. It's one of the comparatively more low-key tracks in the bunch, actually. But then finally we reach the ending with the title track. The beginning with a maybe hip-hop influenced beat playing in some slapping 7/4 time is neat, but it isn't until the strings kick back in later on that this track really kicks into gear for me. It is a very slow and gradual build, but it just really progresses in a remarkably satisfying way, climaxing gloriously a little before the 4-minute mark as these strings really break out and are joined by all these clock ticking noises and finally bleeding into some maybe field recordings in its final moments. It's just freaking great, and is as satisfying and fitting a closer to this album as you can get. So yeah, that's Dynamo. It's this guy's best album, no question. I mean, maybe there's a chance that Away grows on me more when I get to reviewing that, but I really don't think it's gonna beat this out. This was the only project of his when I first heard it. I was like, wow, this is great. And it hasn't worn out with repeat listens either. This project is like spotless. It didn't have a single weak moment on it. It showcased Rumpistol's style in such a way where I would probably be able to recognize him from a distance more easily, but it still fell in line with what he was doing before. It is still a rather introverted and modest listen, not the kind of thing specifically going out of its way to try and knock your socks off or feel particularly large scale, but it just came together here in this really stunning way that none of his other projects did for me. I don't think I've been converted into a longtime fan of Rumpistol in general through my marathon of his other stuff, but if absolutely nothing else, I'm glad doing this series turned me on to this album. If you only check out one project from this guy, I would definitely make it this one. Great stuff. I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, the link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.